We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Brianna Anderson, and she's going to share her story of her medical and surgical trauma from childhood, which there's a lot of listeners, I think, that can relate to that. And then, of course, sharing her healing journey. So thank you, Bri, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so interested in hearing your story. I read it, and it's pretty profound. So why don't you share with us, your story as much as you want to share, and then of course your healing journey, what you've done to, heal yourself and get yourself in the place that you are today. And then, she's also going to share a little bit about basic body-based somatic experiencing techniques, which I do somatic exercises and I know how much they help me. So anytime there's something about somatic, I'm willing to hear it. So
yeah, cool.
So
Awesome.
tell us about your journey.
Okay, cool. So well, I was born with bilateral hip dysplasia, and what that is both of my hips were dislocated. So where the leg connects into the hip joint, there's our bones aren't fully hard until we're 5 years old, and there's a tiny little shelf where the leg bone connects to. Both of mine were behind my pelvis.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know, really bad. And there's a standard test that they do for every baby when they're born. They push their knees into their chest and then their legs open all the way to the table. And mine stopped about halfway. And so they thought that it was just a tendon in the way. Well, I'm the first grandchild. And, time goes on, I'm walking, and my parents don't notice the subtle way that my hips are tilted and how I'm walking. So I kept walking. My brother was born, and they kind of started to notice around like 2.5, that I was walking a little bit funnier. And the doctor said it's just her back. She'll grow out of it. So
Wow.
I know. And I walked like a penguin. So it's kind of, I don't know how that answer sufficed. Like my feet were turned out, and because my legs were behind my pelvis, it was pushing my pelvis forward. Yeah. So I had this like big arc, and I'm like kind of waddling like this because you can't fully move your legs. Right. So they didn't send me to a radiologist to get an x-ray to actually see. So my parents are like, well, it takes, she's going to grow out of it, and growing insinuates time, right? Mm-hmm. So time goes by, and my parents decide to buy a house. And in the process, they move their PPO insurance down to HMO, took me to the HMO doctor. And at 3.5, he sees me walk in, and he looks at them and he says, she has bilateral hip dysplasia. I interned with children with hip dysplasia. So 3 weeks later, I had my very first surgery. And the protocol for that surgery is, you can't just put the leg back, because by 3.5, I didn't, there was no formation of the socket because it needs the weight of the upper body to be created. Right. So they had to, not just cut me open, but they had to crack the pelvis, saw the pelvis, take a piece of the bone and try and form a socket for my hip. So they did my right hip first. And I come out of the surgery in a full body cast, which is, from your ribs all the way down to your toes. My younger surgeries, it was all the way down to my toes. my legs were spread apart. I had a bar between my legs and, a hole so I could go to the bathroom. And they did the surgery 3 weeks later for my left hip, and my right hip had slipped out. So they did the left one. I was in a cast for 6 months, and the process goes, you're stabilized in the cast so that, the bones can heal and all of that, which takes longer to heal than, the tissues of the body. And then you're in a wheelchair, you're on crutches. And then, I was back having another surgery because I was so far developed when I had this happen. I had 10 surgeries from 3.5 to 11. I spent almost 6 of those years in a full body cast.
Oh gosh.
So yeah, it was,
Oh my
it was
goodness.
significant. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's what I was thinking, is going 3.5 years with that not being diagnosed. And I mean, my first thought is that's got to be so painful. I just can't even imagine. And
Mm-hmm.
it's probably miraculous that you could even walk.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I walked significantly funny. I
Oh,
mean, my right heel wouldn't touch the ground. So I was on my tiptoe on my right
yeah.
foot. And, whenever there's any type of cut or laceration with the skin and with the tissues, the body forms scar tissue, and that's abnormal tissue, and it pulls on
Mm-hmm.
all of the musculature. So I had a severe gait, a severe limp, and that was just the physical aspect, or the physical aftermath on top of having chronic pain. I had all of the other, well, not all the other trauma symptoms. I surprisingly didn't have anxiety, but I had depression and massive amounts of shame. I felt very different than everybody else. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, my experience was so different. I don't know how you don't feel that way.
Yeah.
And then, I was in and out of school. I was homeschooled. I would hear all the kids like playing outside, and I wasn't allowed to run. I wasn't allowed to jump. Like, I had very strict, limitations on what I
Mm-hmm.
could do and couldn't do with my body. And so, yeah, it was very intense. It was very sad. It was really hard, especially being a girl, a female. We women are very, how our body is very much a part of, if we're attractive or not
Mm-hmm.
attractive. And so many things after this rippled into, I was 11 for my last surgery. So
Mm-hmm.
here I'm going into my teenage years, feeling deformed, feeling defected, and having all of these, trauma symptoms that I didn't necessarily, I mean, I didn't know was trauma.
Yeah.
And trauma wasn't even a big word back then. I think that
Mm-mm.
people looked at trauma as like vets coming back from wars and having PTSD. Like, that's kind of how it was categorized, not more general and broad how it has evolved into.
Yeah. Day-to-day
Um,
life things that happen, to
yeah.
us ordinary people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's something to be said about that. And I don't know why I was thinking about this yesterday, but, and it kind of was a thought I had about myself that, and I probably think you can relate to this, where you have something like this happen, or I had abuse in my life, and all of a sudden you're not normal anymore.
Mm-hmm,
You're outside the
mm-hmm.
normal.
Totally.
Does
Totally.
that make sense? And you're looking at,
100%.
yeah, you're looking at
Yeah.
everybody else. You're like, okay, you're in the normal. I'm not in the normal anymore. And you're,
Mm-hmm.
and as a child, and you recognize that, you may not articulate it, but you certainly, it's a thought that
Feel
goes
it.
in your head. What do you do with that? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do with that as a
Totally.
kid? As an
Yeah.
adult, it's a hard enough thing to try to manage, but as a child, and so the whole belief system that comes from that, um, is enormous. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is, what were some of the beliefs aside from, I'm not normal, right? I'm different than everybody else.
Yeah.
What other beliefs came out of that? Because that's, something that I think the audience sometimes doesn't realize that we hold these thoughts in within ourselves and we don't say them. And we think nobody else thinks like that. And there are people that think like that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a belief that kind of came to me when
Totally.
it's
And
like,
this is
I'm not normal.
yeah. No, this is a great question. And I describe that feeling as I always felt like I was like not just one octave, but like a two or three octaves off the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And that I didn't fit in. I felt like an alien. Like I felt like I was born into the wrong place, but beliefs. So I'm gonna share some positive beliefs and some
That's
negative beliefs.
that's fine
Yeah,
too.
as
That's
we
great.
lead into the healing portion.
Yeah.
I believed that I believed I was, you know, I'm coming into this in my teenage years, so I think that that's important to talk about like developmentally. But I believed that I was ugly. I believed that nobody would want me.
Mm.
Um, I grew up in a beach town, so we're in bathing suits all the time. And my doctor put me in swimming because there was no gravity. So I didn't have to deal with the effects of the gravity, which I actually became a pretty phenomenal swimmer. I was um, asked to go to the Colorado Springs, the Olympic Training Center, and went there for the Paralympics to experience what it was like and then to go into the Paralympics. And I told my dad, I'm not doing it.
Oh,
Yeah, I told my dad I'm not doing it because I didn't want to be associated with people who weren't normal.
got it. I can
Yeah.
see that. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, some of the painful beliefs that came out of this was that I'm defective, like there's something wrong with me, and that I wasn't pretty. And really, I think the big governing one was that like no boy would want to date me. And so any trauma that happens in our developmental years, whether it's with our parents or medical surgical trauma or sexual trauma, like whatever the trauma is, because it's in our formative years, it affects how we do relationships later on in life and is
Yep.
categorized as developmental trauma. So I made I really picked people below my worth, and it affected my self-worth and my self-esteem. It completely was tied to my identity. I couldn't see myself clearly, and I don't think anybody really can when they have trauma. I mean,
Mm-mm.
massive or small trauma, they can't see themselves clearly.
Yeah.
So when I was little, this is probably, my mom did her best for sure.
Yeah.
I have, I have more to this story. I mean, 2 months after my last surgery, my parents divorced, and
Mm.
it was a very intense divorce. I'm the oldest. I was triangulated back and forth, and it was super intense. I mean, my mom would cry to me, my dad would cry. Anyway, so if that happened then, you have to know that during my surgeries, it was intense too, just inside the family dynamic on top of the surgeries.
Yeah.
But one of the things that my mom did for me that was so profound and really helped me on my healing journey. I remember we were laying down and I'm in my cast on the carpet. One leg's like up in the air.
Oh gosh.
And she said to me, she said, Brianna, you're beautiful on the inside and on the outside. I didn't believe on the outside. I knew on the inside that I was, but not on the outside. And she said to me, I don't know why God is having you go through this, but one day you're going to know. And I held on to that like an anchor,
Mm.
um, knowing that and believing that I was going through this for a reason. I had to believe that I was going through all of this, they call medical surgical trauma when it happens a couple times, they call it ritual abuse. It's categorized as ritual abuse.
Ritual abuse?
Ritual abuse, yeah, because surgeries are so ritualistic, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, even from, a couple days before they draw your blood, you go, and then they're testing to make sure everything's okay. You go
Right.
in to the hospital, like everything. There's a standard protocol. There's a ritualistic
Yeah.
component to it, from
True.
being put under and all of that. So in the world of somatic experiencing and learning how to heal trauma that way, it's considered ritual abuse. So I having all of this massive amount of trauma, in order to survive, in order to move through it, and being pulled into the undertow of all the trauma symptoms, I had to have something to anchor into to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I anchored into the fact that, or the belief that I would one day understand why I was going through this. And in that belief, I chose to believe that I was normal, and that one day
I love it.
I would get to the point in my life where I would feel normal and where nobody would be able to tell that I've had as much trauma as I'd had. And I'm there today, very,
Nice.
very proudly. It took me 3 decades, but I mean,
Well,
I'm here.
yes.
Yeah.
I went a little longer than that before I really had a deep, deep healing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that became my anchor. That became my North Star, my guiding light.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was 12, I read my very first book on healing. It was by Deepak Chopra. The
Mm-hmm.
7 Spiritual Laws of Success. Wasn't exactly about healing, but it had a lot of beliefs and mindset
Yeah.
in that was very supportive for me at that time. And like I said, my teenage years were rocky. The divorce lasted way too long. My brother and I chose to live at my dad's house, and at the very tail end of that, or halfway through high school, I started partying and getting into drugs, because drugs feel good and
Mm-hmm.
they take away the pain that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And on the other side of that, I came out with a baby in my arms at 19 years old.
Mm.
So each decade I had like massive things happening that were challenging, but I wasn't ready to be a mom. And she is the light of my life and the most amazing thing ever. And because of my values with family and parenting and health, having her in my life helped me to get my shit together, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not want to pass down to her what I had experienced in my family growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was in therapy as a teenager, but I went back to therapy. And I was at this point where I'm like, I sleep a third of my life. I'm going to raise my daughter a third, and I really don't want to be doing this. And the other third is I get to work, and I'm going to pick something that I love, right? Something that I'm excited about.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, that was psychology. But to me, something was missing in psychology, because in the therapy sessions that I had done, talking about everything
Mm-hmm.
didn't create a lot of change,
Mm-hmm.
because so much of my symptoms came out of this trauma. And you can't really, I mean, for one, you're put under, which is a beautiful blessing, but I didn't know, and I don't think therapists back then were trained at this type of stuff. So anyway, I started going to school for therapy, but because something was missing, I started studying energy healing, because
Mm-hmm.
I looked out, and I didn't see really like naturopathic medicine as being something that would really help me. I had been to chiropractors, and even though they could align my body, the scar tissue would pull me right back
Oh,
out.
yeah.
I knew that I needed something that would help emotionally, but
Mm.
also physically. And I didn't know what that was, but I was searching. So I went to a 4-year energy healing school. I became a massage therapist. I studied multiple forms of vibrational medicine. The psychology program that I was in, I ended up transferring to a private school and actually studied a lot of art therapy,
Hmm.
and opened my private practice when I was 25. Um, it was a bachelor's in psychology. I didn't keep going. I don't know why. I mean, I know why, but I at that time I felt sufficient enough to start helping people heal with,
Mm-hmm.
not as a therapist, but in, alternative forms of medicine. And yeah, I worked with a I also did some soul healing, and that was
Mm.
really helpful. The energy healing and the psychology was a really beautiful way for me to start lifting some of the heaviness and to make life feel more manageable.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to feel a little bit lighter, and I started feeling better. And as healing goes, you start feeling better, and you, you think like, you think that, woo, I've done it. I've made
Yeah.
it to the other
Yeah.
side.
Yeah, because it feels so amazing when you have that moment, it feels really
Hmm.
good. Yeah. It's so
Totally,
light.
totally. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I've come to learn that there's a ripening with healing, and that we heal
Yeah.
in layers and
Yes.
themes, and that there's cycles for healing. And so I
Mm-hmm.
had moved through my very first cycle, and I wasn't as angry. I was really angry from what had happened with my parents, but my body I had so much, physical abuse from the surgeries, that there was so much trapped inside of my body that I
Yeah.
didn't know that, that's where it was stemming from. But a lot of the relational issues started to uplift a little bit. My relationship with my parents started to get better, and my family relationships started to get better. And I was starting to feel a little bit more comfortable in my skin. I still had a lot of shame, but I started to feel like I was finding who I was.
Mm.
And I was so, my identity was so skewed. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, with shame in general, your identity
Mm-hmm.
is just
Shame is just
completely.
over. It's like a big old umbrella over you.
Yeah,
It's
totally, totally.
consuming.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
consuming, and I call it tar. Like, it's like a
Ooh.
tar that goes over
Yeah.
you, and it like seeps into you. It's like
It
so
sticks to
gross.
you.
Yeah, sticks to you. Yeah, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to get to
Mm-hmm.
resolve it and get away from it. So I saw different healers, on my way, trying to figure out what was going on. I did energy healing. I did like some past life healing. I started, yeah, I tried different things, and some things would work and some things wouldn't. And I think that
Yeah.
that's just how it goes, when you
Yeah.
don't know what it is, what to do, because talking wasn't doing anything for me. It does a lot
Yeah.
for a lot of people, but for me, it wasn't doing a whole lot. So,
When it comes to trauma, though, talk therapy is just not, certainly not where you start. It's okay later on down the line, but like you're saying, you've got to get the trauma out of your body, and you need
mm-hmm,
to get it out of
mm-hmm.
your subconscious. And talk
Yeah,
therapy is not the modality
for
to
sure,
release
for
that.
sure. And the biggest danger with it, and most people start with therapy, when,
Right.
when they have massive amounts of trauma, because they're not most people aren't really educated on healing. We're not taught about how to
No,
do that.
exactly.
So they start with therapy, and then they start talking about the trauma. And when you talk about it, you see it in your mind,
Hmm. You
it gets
relive it.
reactivated in your body, and
Yep.
you re-experience it. And so it actually deepens the trauma in the
Hmm.
system. So I love
Yeah.
that you
It's
know
not
that.
that you remember it. It's that you relive it. That's the
Hmm.
part,
Yeah.
until that trauma is released out of your body. that when you get triggered, whether you're talking about it or whatever triggers you, you're going to absolutely relive it. That's what makes it so difficult.
Yeah. And the reliving is another experience of it.
So. And just deepens that trauma.
Yeah. So in 2017, I was doing great work in my practice. I was helping people heal and resolve some things, and but I started noticing that there was a glass ceiling that I could take them to, and simultaneously, some of my deeper issues were arising right in my face. I had no idea. I don't normally talk about this, but I feel like it's important, especially if there's people listening who have experienced medical trauma. But medical trauma in particular, and traumas that happen while you're laying down, have the potential to create traumas for people while they're laying down. So my trauma while I was laying down, having somebody over me cutting into my body. That circumstance, as I became sexually active, was reminiscent when I'm laying down and someone was over me. So it activated all of the surgical trauma. And thus I lost all agency to be like, oh, I don't want to be in this situation right now. I couldn't, I had no ability to stop what was happening. And so found myself experiencing, some forms of sexual trauma. And so, not even know, I wasn't dissociating, but I was like, I would freeze and was like, I don't want to be in this situation, but a part of me wanted to. So it was like a really weird thing. And I didn't realize why that was happening. Yeah, I didn't realize. So in 2017, that was happening, or it's not that was happening. That had been happening kind of most of the whole time. And I started realizing I'm the denominator here. I'm the common denominator. It's not somebody else. And this is not how I want my sexual experiences to go.
Yeah.
So, I do what I do and went back to the drawing board to try and, figure out what was happening. And I saw a therapist, and she was intimidated by me.
Oh no!
I know.
That's not good.
She was a new therapist, and I was like, okay. I had been working for a long time. I'm very scientific in my languaging. I'm like, okay, you're not the right one. I went to see a sex therapist, and I asked her, what's the protocol here? Because this is what's happening in these situations. And she couldn't give me an answer. And she's like, well, you have good boundaries at work. And I said, yeah, that's at work. That's like with my daughter. But in other situations, like sexually, I don't. And this keeps rehappening. And I don't know why. I don't know why I can't do anything yet. I can be totally different in another arena of my life.
Yeah.
Well, so when I can't find somebody, I enroll in a program, because I'm like, well, I have the skills to do this.
I'm going to figure this out one way or another. Sounds like
totally.
Yeah, sounds like me.
And I enrolled in a tantric program. It was a coaching program, and there were some aspects of the program that were so beautiful, and some that were just horrifying and completely triggering. And it brought all my trauma up to the surface, which needs to happen as we heal, right?
Yeah.
So we're kind of in denial at first, and then we realize, and then everything comes to the surface, which is when people usually turn to start their healing journey, right? So here I am, fully in this program, finding beautiful things happening and fully traumatized in others. And so I sought out a somatic experiencing practitioner. And this was like such a beautiful beautiful transformation that I experienced. And so I decided to study somatic experiencing. In that tantric program, they did breath work.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that was super profound for me. So I studied biodynamic breath work and trauma release. I highly recommend that form of breath work because it's trauma informed. And when we breathe, it can be very activating and bring people's trauma up to the surface. So that modality actually teaches people how to identify it and how to work with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I studied a form of somatic experiencing, a form of trauma resolution on the table because my traumas were laying down.
Mm-hmm.
I needed, when people are standing versus sitting versus laying down, it evokes a different type of consciousness. And so it's easier to access those type of traumas while laying down. So I studied that. And I studied something called yamana body rolling, which was really helpful for the scar tissue and the creating alignment, structural alignment within my
Mm-hmm.
body. So, so yeah, I took a real deep dive in
You
some of
did.
those. Yeah, super deep dive. That was 4 years. I studied 5 different
Wow.
modalities. And it's an interest. It's crazy as a practitioner because you can get kind of confused. Like, is this a better method or is this a better method? As I was flopping back and forth between the intensive weekends for the different trainings. But here I am on the other side. Um, and yeah.
There's a couple points that you brought up, or a couple things that you talked about, and we kind of brushed over a little bit, and I think that they were really kind of profound. Is one that and I don't know how old you were when you got to the point where you realized that you wanted a different future, and
Mm-hmm.
you could even
Mm-hmm.
see that future. And I've talked about that on the podcast before, where I've experienced that myself, and it absolutely has happened to me. How old were you when you had that moment? Because I think you were young, weren't you?
Yeah, I was probably 10.
God, that's really a lot of wisdom for a 10-year-old.
Yeah, thank you.
And so what did
I
you do with that? What did you do with that? I mean, tell us a little more about that, because that's really interesting. And that's something that we all need to do. And that's why I'm kind of diving into this little arena.
I don't, if I wasn't put in swimming, I don't know if I would have been able to fully anchor into that belief. But I was a phenomenal, powerful, very gifted swimmer and athlete. Both of my parents were athletic. So in one
Mm.
arena of my life, physically, right? Because I was dealing with physical stuff, but in one arena of my life, I was a powerhouse. And in another, I was defective, ugly. No one wanted anything to do with me. But I don't know. I really just believed that this isn't who I am. Like, I really believed that I am somebody else. Like, I can't access that person, but inside I know that all of this stuff that I'm dealing with isn't who I am. It's unfortunate that the world around me sees me that way and makes me feel that way, but I know that that's not true.
Yeah.
And I just need to figure out how to get to the other side. And I didn't care how long it took me. And it literally, Lisa, it has been my life. Like, it has been my entire sole focus is, how do I get to the other side? Like, how do I become who I know that I am, even though I'm so confused about who I really am. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that how people look at me is not who I am. Um, yeah, I literally feel like God wove me in with that belief because I don't know
Yeah.
if I would have, I know for a fact if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be here. Um, but
That's really profound. I mean, it took me a long time to come to that belief. I lived
mhm,
many adult years before I came to that realization. And so, and for me, I just automatically went to a different place. I had to come to that conclusion later on in my life by going through therapy and going through modalities and going through a measure of healing before I could actually even see that, let alone believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's true, and that is a truth for everybody, and that's why I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit, because that is the fact that you thought that at 10 years old is incredible, and that you held on to that, and that is what got you through. Absolutely. And that is why your life is so different today, because of that belief. And so out of all those ugly, awful beliefs that you had, there was that, if nothing else, that one really strong belief that you could hang on to. It was your anchor. It sounds like it was your
my
anchor.
Yeah. My anchor, my guiding light. And at least I would have drowned and been pummeled if I did not grasp onto that. It's like
There'd
a
be no
shipwreck
hope.
in the ocean and there's one floating piece of wood, like that was it. And
Yeah.
without that, I'm not interested in knowing what I would look like right now or how my life
Yeah.
would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you touched on, which I'm really glad you said it, you shared it the way you did, was, trying the different modalities, trying the different therapists, and realizing this isn't the right, this isn't the right modality, or this isn't the right therapist, which is really big, because especially when we're beginning our healing journey, and you're right, most people end up starting with therapy. It just, that's what they do. And I know that's what I did. And I didn't start with trauma therapy. I just started with talk therapy and struggled with that. And so, it is, see, I told you I do this. I lost my train of thought. See, I do it too. We were talking about this before we went on to recording, is that sometimes we kind of lose our train of thought. I get on a tangent and then I lose my train of thought. So I'll bring myself back around. But, see, we were talking about, the second point, which was
trying different modalities.
And just, and understand that if you go to a therapist and that therapist doesn't work with you, because remember, they're working for you. It's okay. It's not you, because it's real easy when, especially when you're at the beginning of your healing journey, to think that everything it's you're the problem. It's, but sometimes you just don't click with that person. And it is important to find that right trauma therapist to get through trauma, but also within that arena, the therapist that you're comfortable with, because this is a tough situation to get through, and you need to have the right support, and that's part of your team. And it's really important that you feel safe with them, I guess. Not comfortable, because it's not comfortable, but safe is the right word that I'm looking for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And just to add on to that point, I think that there's a lot of I'm going to share a little story. I'm working with a client right now, and I've been working with her for a while, but she's come into the awareness that she had sexual trauma. And she went back, she's seen me, and she's also seen her therapist, who she's seen on and off since a teenager. She's 27. And she came in for her session last week and was super distraught. And her therapist kind of forced her into sharing her story. And those are her words. She felt forced into sharing her story. She said she wasn't ready to. And, my client only remembers two parts, right? She's dealing with a repressed memory that surfaced, and something activated it. So she's talking about the points when she doesn't want to. And the therapist, and there's amazing therapists out there, I'm not harking therapists, but the therapist interjected halfway through her share and told her that since the perpetrator is the same age as her, right, it was a cousin, a family member, said, she's probably experienced trauma too, so you should have compassion for her. Completely invalidated her feeling. Like one, she put her in a situation where she felt forced to and didn't want to, which mirrors the trauma, right? And then invalidates her, and then tells her she should have compassion for her cousin, her first time sharing. Like, anyway, so
Yeah.
I think
There's a
that
lot to unpack there.
A lot to unpack there, and like, who knows what the therapist hasn't worked through, that was her response, you know, because we each have our own things to work through as we support people. We can get activated too. But the main thing that I want to say about people who are on their path healing is that it's so easy to be in a vulnerable place and wanting to heal. And when people start seeing therapists or healers or practitioners, they automatically put themselves as the inferior person to somebody who's superior.
Yes.
And so they give them more power in the dynamic. And so things like this happen, and these things should not ever happen. And so it's important, and people learn to do this along their healing journey, but to be able to learn what's best for them and to make those choices, and to get up and walk out of any healing session if it's not working for you and if it's re-injuring. So anyway, I just wanted to.
No, I'm glad you shared that. That's a valid point, because remember, they're working for you. They're there to help you. You have to be the one that's in command. And I mean, the fact that she forced her to share the story, you know, nobody should ever, you know, and that is, this is my opinion only, but I will say that anybody that tries to force me to tell my story, that's just not right. You know?
Yeah. Red flag.
Yeah. Big red flag. And then, you know, that is not the time to have empathy for anybody else. So there's a lot wrong with that. So I'm glad that you shared that, because you're right. We are the ones that are in control of, we need to be in control of our healing and what we bring in, who we bring in to our healing circle. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that, because that's a really good point. Excuse me. So one of the things that I thought we would talk about more is your somatic, the body-based somatic experiencing techniques. If you can kind of share a little more about what that is, and yeah, because I think I know, but I want to know for sure.
Absolutely. I'm going to start with a preface. You know, on social media, like the word somatic and somatic healing and somatic coaches. Yeah, it's super used a lot, and I'm seeing it used inappropriately in some circumstances. And anyway, so soma means, it's a prefix that means body. And so somatic is from the body's perspective. Somatic experience. Yeah. Isn't that cool? Somatic experiencing is it's a 3-year long program where people are trained and taught how to work with very specific types of trauma and trauma categories. So developmental trauma, medical surgical trauma, slips and falls, car accidents. You would work differently per case, because the trauma is going to, their symptoms that they have are going to be different, and it's going to manifest in the body differently. So if people aren't really aware of that, then they don't, in my opinion, they're not skillful enough at working with the body. So just feeling like what sensations you're feeling in the body isn't necessarily somatic healing. It could be somatic awareness and bridging a relationship with the body, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's supporting the body and resolving trauma. I just want to say that first, because I'm very passionate about what I see wrong and what people are learning, you know, about, you know, the word somatic and what that field is. So somatic experiencing, we're taught very specific methods and very specific interventions on how to work with the mind, body, and spirit, but it's through the body, through the avenue of the body, and it's through sensations. And so you start by learning, or you know, the best way to say this is, in order to do this type of work, people need to be able to sense into what they're feeling. And some people have such massive amounts of trauma that their body's not safe.
Yeah.
So they don't want to feel into their body, because then they start dissociating, right? Or they have so much anxiety that they become so dysregulated. So the techniques I'm going to share are not for those people. I'll share one for those people. Actually, since we're talking about it, I'll just start there. A very beautiful way to start working with present time and in the moment and being connected to yourself. If you are super dysregulated or your body's just not safe. So anytime you feel into your body, you want to like run away or distract yourself.
You know what I call that? I want to crawl out of my own skin and get away from myself. That's what I call that.
Yes. Catapult and crawl away.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, the best thing to do is to actually use your eyes and to notice what's in your field of vision. And so the things that are closest to us, if you maybe look at the top of your computer, I don't know if you have a window, versus if you can look out the window and look far away, you ideally want to be scanning slowly and noticing what is pleasing for the eye. So it might be something shiny and pretty. It might be something, the horizon far off on the distance. But if we focus on something that is pretty or pleasing to the eye, and we just notice what we are looking at and notice how it's pretty, we can see that it has an effect on us. And so it can be very regulating for people if they can take the time to notice that. So that is one thing that people who don't feel safe in their body can do. Generally, things that are further away that are pretty are quicker to creating, self-regulation. Things that are closer are a little bit more, takes longer, shall we say. So.
Okay, interesting. Huh.
So for people who tend to feel more comfortable in their body, or just another exercise, you would start by noticing something that is solid and stable, like the chair that you're sitting in. And just noticing the contact that your body's making with the chair. And in particular, I like to have people trace, like if your back is on the chair, your seat is in the chair, if you can find the line where the body's making contact with the chair.
I'm doing that as you explain it.
Yeah, good. What do you notice as you do that?
The chair's hard. That's what I notice. It's not as comfortable as I'd like it to be. But it's warm, and I'm not sitting back, so I'm noticing I have to, make myself sit up straight. But yeah, I feel it. It's warm. It feels hard. Not as comfortable as I'd like. Hard. Yeah.
Good. So ideally we would want to make ourselves as comfortable as we can before starting this exercise, yes. Right? Another variation, and if you notice, I'm going out towards in, right? We have the visual, then something that's making contact with our body. A third thing that people can do, and all of these exercises are for self-regulation, right? They're to move more into the parasympathetic nervous system and get out of being activated, which is anything intensely emotional or, where we're super dysregulated. So,
and it's grounding us as well too, right?
Yes,
bringing us
super
to the present.
Grounding. Yes, all of these are super grounding and stabilizing. Grounding, stabilizing, and has the potential to create more coherence where all of us is feeling present and the same. So the third would be to actually scan the body and to just seek out what is the most pleasant sensation that you can find and feel in this moment. Sometimes that might be making contact with something. That could be like your hands on your thighs, or people could even put a hand over their heart and a hand over their low belly, right? So it could be contact that they're making with themselves, or it could be, gosh, my feet, they feel kind of light and tingly, So the skill with somatic work, which is a precursor to being able to do the trauma resolution, somatic experiencing trauma resolution work, is to be able to develop the skill and the discipline to stay with the sensation while getting curious about it. So if the feet are the most pleasant, or maybe the top of the head, right? It's to be able to stay with that sensation and know and get curious as to, as you stay with it, how does it change? So it changes, and sometimes it doesn't change. Sometimes people get pulled towards where they're activated, so they might notice, oh, my feet feel good, but like I just feel this pounding in my chest, or my chest feels like it's closing in, right? Which is
Tightness.
their, the tightness, or they could feel like anxiety coursing up, or pain somewhere in their body. And so, the body's pulling them to where it needs tending to, right? But it's important to do somatic work, and you have to do trauma resolution work with a skilled practitioner who's stable, because the stable person helps their nervous system move from destabilization. It helps them to complete. So the trauma symptoms are several different things. If we categorize them generally, they are incomplete protective defensive responses. So, for instance, for me on the table, in the surgery room, I was given general anesthesia, right? But other parts of my body were alive and aware. So when the surgeon was coming towards me with a knife, I had instincts and impulses inside of me that wanted to be expressed but couldn't, right? I wanted to run off the table.
Oh,
I
right.
wanted to growl or fight or push the surgeon away, and I didn't get to do those. So those were stuck inside my body, contributing and causing the trauma symptoms. Um, with with most types of trauma, there's boundary ruptures, which can be physical or emotional or psychological, right? There can be on different levels. So boundaries, there needs to be boundary repair work. There's, thwarted emotions that are stuck and trapped in the body. And so those need to be expressed in a healthy, um, not too overwhelming way. So these are the main things that get thwarted and stuck inside the body that somebody really needs to resolve, and to express and to heal in order to move through those trauma symptoms through somatic work. So that is really what it's about. And you can't do that alone, but you can learn to be more self-regulated by doing those three practices. So if you notice while doing the third one that your attention gets drawn to your chest, or to a unpleasant sensation, see if you can be with it and notice it. If it's too overwhelming, then you will use your eyes to start looking away from the body to downregulate. But if you can be with it and it's manageable, you do the same thing. You get curious, and oftentimes sensations do a couple things. They only do three things. They intensify, they stay the same, or they diminish. And so sometimes the sensation, if you be with it long enough, it might intensify and then diminish. And then you'll find that you're more regulated after. You're less emotional about the person that just called you a name or yelled at you or something like that, right? So that is 3/4 things to do, body-based somatic interventions to help when someone's feeling too much intensity.
Oh, thank you for sharing those, because I do some of those, and I know that it brings you to the present moment. It kind of tells my brain that everything's okay. We're okay. We're in a, trying to convince myself I'm in a safe space, because that's what it feels
Totally.
like. It feels like I'm not safe. I mean, that's one of the feelings I get when I get dysregulated, is I just don't feel safe. And so those have helped me, especially breathing techniques too, to just kind of get my body calmed down so that I can, because the craziness that goes through your brain when that's happening is just really frustrating.
Super frustrating.
Yeah.
And it loops over and over and over.
Yeah.
In doing those exercises, it actually tending to the self in that way with the body. What happens is that our mind can see that we're not in the same scenario or the same situation that activated it, but our body doesn't know that. Our body stays activated because it's been triggered, right? And
Right.
so it's still fluttering around or doing whatever it's doing. And so when we tend to it that way, it lets the body know, oh, that experience is over. Like, I'm not in that anymore. I can come out of this state. So it's and that's how it knows that it's safe again.
Yeah, it kind of snaps you out of that
Mm-hmm.
loop
Mm-hmm.
or that cycle that
Yes.
you're in, kind of snaps you out of it, so that because I've described that a lot, where I get in that loop and I've done something to kind of snap myself out of it, and then I'm able to see, oh, okay, I don't have to do the same thing over and over. I can do this other thing, and then it's just a great way to kind of break that whole cycle. It's really
Mm-hmm.
empowering.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Yeah. Super, super. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it takes practice, but then the more you do it, the easier it is.
It
So.
starts to come it starts to come kind of natural. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're able to catch yourself, feeling triggered or whatever, dysregulated, and you're able to catch that quicker, and then you're able to stop it quicker.
Mm-hmm.
It's all
Mm-hmm.
managing our on our healing journey. We don't I know for me, I don't believe that we completely heal, but I think we absolutely learn how we can manage this stuff, and that we're managing it rather than it managing us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
And these are great techniques. And so, yeah, listeners, we use these techniques. I use these techniques on myself, and I highly recommend them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you look at this yet. I was going to ask you a question. So the question is, how can our listeners reach out to you if they want to learn more about this, or if they maybe want to coach with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can find me on my website. My website's Healing with Bri, BRI, and everything is there. So they can also look me up on Instagram. I'm not super, super active. It's kind of a scary place for me. So I'm like slowly easing into
That's what I had to do
developing
too. Yeah, I'm not.
developing that. Yeah.
If I didn't have to do it, I wouldn't.
Yeah, totally, totally. But that same handle, Healing with Bri. But they can read my story, not that they don't already know more from this, but find the different types of things that I do. I offer a 12-week online class or program that is oriented at helping people resolve body trauma. And it's basically the most potent things that I have learned and that helped me in my healing journey, laid out in a very, methodical, sequential way that I'm so very proud of. But yeah, so I have that, and people can work with me one-on-one. I do, sessions in person here in Southern California. My office is located in San Juan Capistrano, and I also
Oh,
see
it's
people over Zoom.
beautiful.
So
One of the most beautiful
mhm,
places in California, for sure. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
yes, love
Beautiful.
it here.
So one
Mhm.
last question. What do you want to leave our listeners with?
Oh my gosh, I think that healing's possible. You know, it is so possible, and it's our birthright, and we're designed to heal.
Mm-hmm.
We cut our skin and it heals. We're designed to heal. We just need to discover and find the right conditions that create healing for our mind, body, and spirit. And it can absolutely be a struggle. I mean, it not can be, it is a struggle in certain moments. And at certain times you want to give up. And at certain times you feel like it's never going to happen. And at certain times you're just hating that this is what you lived with and that it's so painful. And you know that you would have been a completely different person if these horrible things never happened to you. But healing is possible. And as you walk the journey and get to the other side, I guess I can really only speak for me, but I love who I am. I wouldn't change anything. I would go through it all again. The things that I've lived through absolutely tore me apart and broke me, but they created things inside of me that I have and that I've developed that I am so grateful for and so proud of. And I believe that everybody who chooses the courageous path to heal also discovers what those are inside of themselves. And so don't give up. Healing is possible. And
it's for everyone.
It's for everyone. It's a challenging journey, but so very worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the healing part certainly overshadows by far in my life those struggles and those hard times. And those hard times are, I'm not diminishing them. They are hard. I still have them every once in a while. I still have a hard moment, and have to go back to my basics and remember what the truth is. Because a lot of times when we go to those dark places, we can start believing things that aren't true.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Bree, thank you so much for sharing your story and most importantly, the story of hope and what you've done to heal and what you offer others. And I think it's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was so lovely to be here.
Thank you.